Yeah, welcome back to Play Free FC, real conversations with the people who shape the game. It's been a crazy couple weeks. Spring break, I turned 50 somewhere in there, work, travel, life, but we're back. And honestly, this one deserved a reset. This is going to be part one of what is now a three-part series with Mark Franek. He played at Duke, went to be a teacher, to a lawyer, and back to teaching again, now at the famed YSC Academy with the Philadelphia Union Youth System. And now the author of American Soccer Nation, which is available wherever you can buy or want to buy your books. We went deep into the roots of this game, hence the three-part series. And what hit me right away is that this just isn't history. This is our story, the American story. And we're talking early days before rules, before structure, how the game was built, how it spread, and how the U.S. was right there literally at the beginning and then went to a completely different direction. We talk about some personal things that or I am somewhat connected to. Archie Stark, his great grandson, Richie Santos, is a wonderful friend of mine. He's considered the Babe Ruth of American soccer. Walter Barr for all us Philly and Penn State folks. Richie Reese, Randy Garber. So many of you know him, played for him, or played for folks under his coaching tree. And there were just moments in this conversation where I just sat back. How did I not know this? If you love soccer, if you love history, or if you care about where this game is going in this country, I think this one matters. So go check out American Soccer Nation. Links below in the description, details. Wonderful book. Philly Soft Pretzel Factory in Langhorne. Tell them Freddie C sent you. Grab yourself a free pretzel. Hill and C Company. I wear their gear pretty much daily. Great people, great brand. And lastly, Dave Site now due to the show, but it's been around for quite some time. My friends in Rosalind Porcano are doing some incredible work. Their daughter has Usher syndrome type 1B, and they're raising money for research in a cure. There's a World Cup VIP auction live in the links below. If you can support or share, it goes a long way. So, all right. I'm excited to reintroduce Mark Franek to you folks to a re-edited version of this series. This is part one. We're going to have part two, fast follow, and part three, fast follow, all being launched at the same time. So I hope you enjoy the show. All right, let's get into this, John. Mark Franek, thank you for thank you for joining the podcast here. I'm genuinely excited to have you on. I've known of you, played against you. So many of our mutual friends speak so highly of you and what you've done here with writing American Soccer Nation. I'm really excited to just to jump into it and talk to you about you and about the process and all the things within the book.
Thank you, Freddie. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to the listeners for your time.
Absolutely. I think you're going to find a nice sized Philadelphia audience listen to this and then trying to get into North Jersey and spread it out a little bit. So anything I can do to help you get the word out about this book, which, and I genuinely mean this, I am a semi soccer history nerd, but I very much enjoyed the book and we'll get into that if you're ready. So before I kind of want to start with you, if that's cool. I think your path is really unique. I had an earlier podcast with a gentleman named Nate Lee, and he's the head coach of Kansas women's soccer. And he was essentially an investment banker, financial wizard, and decided when he was 30 to just get out of that and go into coaching and making like $10,000 a year just in pursuing a passion. And when I looked at your background, I see that law school, practice law, then found your way back to education. You started as a teacher. I'd love to understand a little bit about where you're from and how did soccer first find you, and maybe talk a little bit about your background.
Yeah, great. So I grew up in York, Pennsylvania, which is a relatively small town in south central Pennsylvania, about an hour up from Baltimore and maybe an hour south of Harrisburg. And my family was not a soccer family. I mean, my dad, I always joke that maybe he threw the javelin in high school, but he did not ascend to any great heights athletically. I was late to the game, the soccer game, actually. My father and mom had me playing gridiron football for the first 6, 7 years of my life. So from U6 to U7, what the USSF calls Zone 1, I had no soccer DNA, which my friends like to tease me about today because I'm not very technical. If I have anything, I'm a little bit of a blue collar defender and I just never quit. But other than that, I don't have much skill because I didn't start playing until I was about 13. And
Oh,
the brief
interesting.
story there is that, in the mid 80s, you're pretty athletic and you start taking it seriously. You love the game. I was able to do some things relatively quickly that caught the eye of some coaches, particularly at camps. I mean, that was, you could get noticed a little bit on an ODP team, Freddie, right? And
Right. It was
maybe if
different.
you were in Philadelphia, Boston, St. Louis, a big city that had some high end clubs that were rooted, those super clubs that were pretty old. But if you're some kid in South Central Pennsylvania, the only way you're going to get noticed really is at a camp. And thus, I did get noticed at a camp and fortunately turned the eye of a couple coaches at a Duke University camp and was grateful that I got recruited. But I played very few minutes during my short stint at Duke University. Sure, I'm on the roster. There are pictures of me that prove it. But once again, I was coming in and on the bottom of the roster. So that was my story. Like I loved the game and fell in love with it almost immediately in my teens. The DNA, though, in terms of your athletic ability, in terms of the technical, tactical side of the game, was completely almost oblivious to me in my teens. And I didn't really start, just to put a button on it, I didn't really understand the game and start thinking about the game and become pretty good at the game until after college, where I found myself playing during the summers for 7 to 8 summers in a row in Iceland, where they take their summer soccer very seriously. And that was my education in my 20s. And when I wasn't teaching, I would dart off to Iceland for the summer and then come back and play for the Ukrainian nationals here and then teach at Penn Charter.
So why Iceland? Kind of, I don't know if it's random. Maybe it's not in your story. How did you pick Iceland to go to?
Right. So my first gig out of college was to teach at and coach at Montgomery Academy. Now here's the deal. I'm 22. I'm a
Right.
hot shot. So I think in my
Yeah.
brain, I'm a
Right.
Duke grad, right? I want to teach English and I don't want to teach British lit. I want to teach American lit and I want to be the head soccer coach, not the assistant, not the ninth grade. So I sent out all these resumes. Nobody responded. The only school that would take me was at the end of Route 95 in downtown Montgomery called the Montgomery Academy, which allowed me to come in and do what I wanted. So I took that only job offer. So I found myself at 22, 23, teaching something that I loved and cutting my teeth as a teacher and
Okay.
also coaching. And kid you not, I didn't know until I got there that there's no fall soccer because gridiron takes all the fields. It's soccer in Alabama is in the spring. And in the spring of my first year of teaching, we amassed a wonderful 0-18-1 record. And the
So,
only tie we had was against a team that had left half its team home for spring football training. So yes, my illustrious coaching career got off to a rather dismal start. But to answer your question about Iceland, so I'm a transplanted Yankee from York, Pennsylvania in Montgomery, Alabama. And there's several universities like Montgomery, AUB, University of Alabama, and these schools that are there in downtown Montgomery that had Icelandic student athletes on scholarship. And I would meet them in bars or out because Montgomery's a tiny town and we're relatively the same age. I'm 23, they're 20, and we got to know one another. And hence, what started there was, hey, Mark, you're not teaching over the summer. You don't want to stay in Alabama where it's 103 degrees in the shade. Come to Iceland, which I did. And here's what happened when I went to Iceland. That's a whole other story. It's a beautiful country, rather attractive young women for a single
right.
man in Alabama. And I started recruiting the best player from the town where I played in. He then came to Montgomery Academy. And then when I went north back to Penn Charter, the William Penn Charter School, for 4 years in a row, there was a student athlete that was hosted by family, soccer playing family in my school. So it kind of created this flywheel effect for
Mm.
me to have this intimate connection with Iceland going back and forth between America and Iceland with the soccer component and connection.
So let's go back to what pulls you into teaching in the first place. I'm curious to understand the drive of going into education for you.
Yeah, so I was a senior, I was a fourth year senior at Duke, and I decided to stick around Duke to get a Master of Arts in Teaching. At the time, there was a scholarship available, and I started volunteering as a senior at the university to local needy disadvantaged youth in the Durham, North Carolina school district who
Okay.
were come onto campus and be taught in certain areas by seniors. It wasn't just English. There was some math and some other science stuff related. And I really got into that as a senior, like to throw yourself into a classroom. And when I'm a young man, I didn't know how to teach, but I quickly fell really in love with the journey. It was very frustrating because I didn't know what I was doing. And, but I enjoyed it. And Duke allowed me to stick around for one more year and basically live for free to become a resident advisor. They would pay for most of the degree. It was basically a no brainer to rack up another MAT. That didn't help me get any job, by the way,
Right.
because I wanted to teach, I wanted to teach American Lit and be the head soccer coach. But it really set me up credential wise to really be able to move into that teaching role. And of course, that's where I found myself in downtown Montgomery, Alabama for that first 4 years of my 20s. I learned how to teach and coach for that matter.
Sure. And then, so from there, and I hope you don't mind me just getting into this. I just find it fascinating. So from education, you went into law?
Right. So the story there, I taught for 4 years at Montgomery Academy, then transitioned up to the William Penn Charter School in Philadelphia after 4 years, a sojourn in the South, if you will. I wanted to return. I mean, I fell in, I didn't want to necessarily fall in love and settle in the deep South. I wanted to go back to where I was born. And, there was a job opening at the William Penn Charter School where it was a high school English position and the head soccer coach. And I had heard, Mark, you're going to inherit this great team. Chris Albright, one of
Oh,
the best
right.
players in the country at the time, is going to be a senior. Yeah, it was pretty much a no brainer. I came up, I saw the school and they fortunately hired me to teach English and coach the soccer team. But to answer your question, I did that for a good 10, 12 years. I became the dean of students eventually. So, I learned a lot more about teaching, had some good times and some bad times on the soccer side, like every coaches do over a decade, became the dean of students. And then what happened was the true story about that is I met my soon to be wife and I started carting around her stuff over the summer. Well, she had two trials at the time. And over the summer, when I'm not working, I could become her gopher or her
Right.
legal
Right.
assistant. And
Oh,
I
how
watched
interesting.
her in trial, right? And I'm in my mid 30s at the time, and I was completely blown away. And not only that, there's a part anecdote about that. We got married. I watched her in trials. I was mowing lawns for neighbors in East Falls, right behind Philadelphia Textile at the time,
Yeah.
Philadelphia University. I think it's Jefferson University now. I would
Can't
mow
keep up.
yard for like $15 to $20 a pop. I was thinking, look at all this money I'm making on my off days as teaching. One of the neighbors, right, hired my wife, lawyer, to, I don't know, to do something in his local painting firm, and she charged him like $3,000, and the guy like ripped off the check. There was no reason. And I suddenly realized I'm 35. What am I doing mowing this guy's lawn for $20? And that precipitated, a conversation. Hey, Mayman, my wife, what do you think about a career change for me? I think I could do this. I'm a pretty good writer. I don't like to lose. Let's go to law school. And, that happened. I mean, my wife did not help me. I had many of the same professors that she had at Temple. But yeah, I
That's
went
amazing.
through for a 3 year degree at Temple in what we call mid career. So
Okay.
it was one of those things where I was kind of in the mid career. The progression for a person like me in his mid 30s, it's got good credentials and had racked up 10 to 15 years of teaching, was to become a director of a school and then perhaps, one of those upper level administrators. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of a career and that kind of
No.
a life. But I was just like many people, perhaps a little bit itchy about doing something else. And that something else became law, which I did take a hiatus from teaching for almost a decade. And that had its own rises and falls and conflicts and
Sure.
triumphs.
And I'm sure you learned a ton. I just find that so interesting, and the bravery that you have to do something like that at that age is just, I commend you. I commend you. I think it's amazing. All right. So you're practicing law. You get back to the classroom. Let's just fast forward. Now you're at YSC Academy. I was there in the kind of the infancy of it with Richie and Phil Karn. And, I just think it's such a unique place. And I guess for listeners who don't know, from your words, what is YSC Academy?
Yeah. Hey, can I just step back and just tell a little bit of story about how I got involved, and then we can go back into that? So my entry and reintroduction to teaching, which brought me and so fortunate to be a part of the faculty at YSC Academy, started by chance and not by intent. I was following the union as a lawyer, and I had a son who was about maybe 6 at the time. And I had known Brendan Sullivan, and we had played against him. Like, that's part of the connectivity of the book that we're all talking about, your podcast, my book. We're all
Yeah.
connected in one way or another. And in here, it's the Philadelphia network, but in every city around the country, there exists the same nodes and the same connections and the same crazy, wonderful soccer people. It's wonderful. Maybe Philadelphia is unique in a couple ways, but let's be honest. We're all part of the growing soccer nation. I went to YSC Academy because the school was literally 50 yards from YSC Sports, where I had applied my poorly trained soccer skills and I walked over, knocked on the door to talk to Brendan because I know his son had just turned pro at the Union. And he had told me, hey, wanted to get a signed jersey. He said, well, go get one from the store, soccer post down the street, and I'll get one to sign it. He's over here. So, one day when I wasn't billing hours and my head was exploding, I went over there with a jersey. Who opened the door was Nuha Ahmed Lee, who
Yep.
I had worked with for a full decade at the William Penn Charter School. And this just underscores for many listeners the power of connectivity that goes back to people that you are with early in your life and you're sharing in some endeavor, and then you or her or him go on and do other things and you come back together. Nuha saw me. We hugged, hadn't seen each other in over a decade. And she precipitated to give me a tour of the building. I got my jersey signed for my son. And then here's what started. Nuha started talking to me and engaging me in really detailed conversations. And it wasn't until like 2 hours later that I realized she's like vetting me for a job to have an inkling that you want to get out of the law.
Get out.
At the time, I was not particularly a happy camper. Literally, if you're a mid-40s guy, you get into the law a little late, you write pretty well, but you're not you don't know Mark Zuckerberg's, Freddie. I know Brendan Sullivan teacher guys, painters,
Right.
Sean Riley painting guys. I know
Right.
I'm billing these guys like $100, and my partner comes in, Mark, we haven't billed somebody $100 since 1980. You can't bill these guys $100. And like, giving me work to do every weekend, and my kid's starting to play. And I'm like, do I really? My wife's kicking butt in the legal. I look forward with dual income, single kid, Freddie, right? I
Right.
don't necessarily need to burn the midnight oil into my 60s. Hence, with the full permission of my boss, my real boss, my wife,
Yep. Mine as
I
well.
threw my resume in front of Nuha, and we negotiated it. And she gloriously, after vetting me with Richie, of course, said, hey, Mark's a seasoned, teacher. He's built up this relationship and he stepped out. I mean, he wants to get back into it. Let's do it. So that was for me a lucky not serendipitous. It became connections. What I think is remarkable is that soccer people are connected. Soccer teachers, perhaps, once you get into that world, perhaps it's just like any business, it takes a while to establish yourself, and then connections matter. They may go dormant for years or even decades, but they are alive. And it's something I tell my son and all the kids that I teach is that realize that someone's always watching and we're all connected. And what you do when people aren't watching and how you establish yourself and your professionalism that you bring to bear on the pitch and in the classroom and over a long time helps. It really matters. And knew how, she interviewed me, kind of got a sense of where I was in my life and whether I had any interest in getting back in the classroom. And I certainly did. She called me at a good time. I put in a good 7 or 8 years in the legal profession, realized what it was and realized where my star wasn't going to be. There's no way I was going to become an equity partner when I know painters and plumbers and those ilk, and I'm not going to be bringing in business. I'm basically going to be carrying water for partners because I'm a decent writer. And there's nothing wrong with that life. But heck, man, I wanted to get back in the classroom. I knew it felt real. And I was
Yep.
fortunate that Richie in New Haw offered me a position and I haven't looked back. So yeah, I'm back in the classroom going on 5 years now, and it's really wonderful. I enjoy spending the time with the kids, even though they're getting to be more and more of a pain in the neck now with artificial intelligence. But that's a story for another time.
That's another time. All right, so then let's get back to the question. Maybe tell the listener, what is YSC Academy?
YSC Academy is the fully embedded, qualified, credentialed, independent school that is embedded within the Philadelphia Union franchise. It was founded by part owner of the Union, Richie Graham, about 13 years ago. And it was a gift that he not only gave to the Philadelphia Union, but the Philadelphia region and the soccer people here to establish a school, and not to retread ground that he's already spoken about. But the gist of that was he and his brother had grown up at ski schools where he had witnessed firsthand the power of intertwining academics with the high end performance aspect, where they're pushing and working together, push potential elite skiers on the professional level, but wholly understanding that the vast majority of people in the program are going to college. And he recognized, well, listen, if the ski people can do kind of stuff, why can't the soccer people? And he marshaled his considerable resources and has given of his time, energy, and money for well over a decade to establish this school. So what is it? It is a school. Currently, it's not affiliated, which means you don't have to be within the Philadelphia Union's youth teams to be on it, meaning you can be a depth player, you can be a sporting AC player, and maybe 10 or so of our 85 kids are currently not on a union team, but they're getting an education within the building. And it's much like an independent school,
Right.
because you have your 5 standard classes. You have your math, you have your science, English, history, and Spanish, and or another foreign language. So it works in some ways like a traditional school because you have classes taught by qualified, caring adults. But it, again, is a truly unique phenomenon because it's all soccer, all day, total immersion, and it's glorious for the kids who end up in the building. Imagine if you're 13, you expired, you got hit by a SEPTA bus, and you could design a place where you would want to be when you were 14. Imagine coming to the Philadelphia footprint, going over that Commodore Barry Bridge. You're on a roller coaster, you come down, you see the bridge, you see the water, you see the school, you see the 50, $60 million sportsplex. You come down and you train for it. Come on, Freddie. Let's bring us back to the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah.
You can train for 90 minutes in the morning and you can shower within a facility that rivals the best pro shower locker rooms in the whole world, even in Europe. And oh my gosh, you walk 5 minutes away and you come in and you get your bagel and your eggs and your muffins that are already put there with your name on it or whatever it's there. And you can get a cup of coffee, a little cappuccino if you want. And then you waltz over at 10:30, 11 o'clock to be taught by Brendan Sullivan, Mr. Sullivan, and Mr. Franek, and 15 other caring adults who don't care about how many minutes you just played, don't care how many stupid mistakes you just made. We're not involved with you as coaching. We only care teaching you, which we do as best as we can do for 5, 6 hours in the day. And boom, 3:15. Oh my gosh, you play a snack and you're back to training at 4:30 for another 90 minutes. And oh my gosh, the weekend, you want free tickets to the union, you want into the union's box. Oh, they're available. Rinse, wash, repeat 4 or 5 years. Some of you are going to go pro. The rest of you guys are going to go on to college, many Division I soccer scholarships. It's a win-win scenario. So the kids feel like, I don't know what they feel like, actually. I think they don't realize how lucky they are.
No, sounds just like Neshaminy High School. Why? For a listener, Commodore Barry Bridge is the bridge that takes you from New Jersey into Chester, Pennsylvania, which is where the YSC is located, which is just south of Philadelphia. What a glorious! I genuinely can't wrap my head around it as much as I even know. And you saying that just got me so pumped up. I had the chills. What a gift! What a gift that Richie has given that area. I was driving by it the other day on the way home from my sister who lives in Alexandria, Virginia, and I was thinking, wow, the proximity to Delaware, the proximity to New Jersey, the proximity to Maryland, the proximity to all this, it's like right there. What a wonderful place. And what I love the most about what you just said is we don't care how many minutes you have. We're here to teach. We're here for you to learn and for you to become a better human being. All the soccer stuff is ancillary. It's there, but I'm here to help you grow and be better academically and be a better human. And that's the best part of that.
But when I talk to parents who are having kids who are thinking about potentials of being in an MLS environment, MLS next environment, and they're considering the union, here's my pitch to them. And listen, I have drank, I don't want to use Kool-Aid thing. That's not the right reference. It's hard for me to be objective because I'm employed there and my son's in the program. I got it. But hear me out for a moment, if you will. I try to compress the story of what is unique about the Philadelphia Union and the YSC into the following story. Imagine an MLS team that's not created yet, but let's just call Memphis. Memphis doesn't have an MLS team yet. Maybe they will get one. Let's say that Memphis, a year from now, establishes a fully functioning franchise with a fully functioning youth academy. And in that youth academy, all 20 coaches and support staff are the best at what they do. They're the best coaches. They're Pep Guardiola like. And for 90 minutes a day, the sons, the boys at that Memphis FC are getting the best training, the best coaches. But at 7 o'clock at night, they leave the facility, they go home, they shower, maybe they do some homework, and they get up and they go to school the next day. The school that they go to the next day doesn't have to be imagined. It looks like the school where you and I, maybe many listeners, went to. It's a relatively traditional American high school where the sport of soccer ranks third or fourth on the totem pole. It's not central. It's always getting short shrifted, so to speak. There's not a lot of crowds. The cheerleaders are there cheering for the football team, and soccer doesn't feel real, and people aren't talking about it all the time. Bad school. It's just an American school. Now compare that to what's going on at the Philadelphia Union and YC Academy. When the kids get done showering at night, they go home, they get up, they're on their way back to the footprint down there, and they have their training, and then they have the school, which is interwoven literally and figuratively into the program. Meaning, if they leave for a 1 week on national team camp, we adjust the curriculum to them. They're meeting throughout the day with coaches to go over film. They meet the first team nutritionist who comes into our building to educate them on how to treat their bodies. They have coaches from Division Ones come into the buildings to talk to them about the next level, what they can do to help increase their chances. They're totally immersed in the soccer dream. And the dream has many off ramps or other ramps and branches. Recall, most of them know they're not going pro, but they're going to college where they can use and the hardworking skills that they develop for 4 years to do something else, sometimes related to soccer, sometimes not. I know it's a long-winded story, but it really underscores what the unions have been able to do. And imagine if 40 or 50% of the 30 MLS teams were able to do something similar in their market, like what Richie and the union have been able to do. We would move the needle at the highest level if more MLS clubs would follow the union's lead, figure out what works in their environment, and kind of combine the soccer component with the academic environment. That's the only way it's going to work, I believe, in the American family social milieu.
Yeah, and you get to that in the end of your book, and I know my best buzz. He is going to be going to the CO Center of Excellence up here. He's going to be a part of the first 8th grade class, and I know that they work with YSC to a degree. He plays for NYCFC.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, generational player, and I'm so happy for him that he's going to have that experience. And I don't know how they do it compared to you, but it seems to be a replication of what YSC is doing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that school at all, but
Yeah, I'm familiar with the school and, of course, all the wonderful things that put with NYC and their stadium and the amount of money that they're putting in. Man, it is going to be wonderful. And hopefully they figure out a way to keep the educational component paramount. And of course, it's your fancy feet that is really driving the whole program. But the academic portion of the program has to be in tandem and it has to be engaged in some way that you can support unique pathways to the kids. It's very difficult to do, but it's not impossible.
it's interesting. One of the things I recognize in your book is how academics and soccer development are connected, not separate. And that was even the case back in the 1800s. I think you're referencing, it was Princeton or whoever it is. Academics are dull or boring to get them running around in the field. kind of got the energy out of these kids.
Yeah, certainly for soccer historians here, I'm going to be glazing over hundred and a millennia, but let's just remind people of pre-soccer, pre-football, if you will, was mob football, right? And let's just focus briefly on what that concept means for the Brits. And the Brits, I'm really talking about the English, the Scots, the Welsh, the Northern Irish. I'm not going to get into that footnote, but let's talk about English. Imagine 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 300 years ago, you find yourself a wealthy white son, and you are put into a wealthy white school, yeah, and you're being taught by masters that are spending hours of their time lecturing at you, sometimes in Greek
Right.
and Latin, about Greek and Latin, and you're about ready to stab your eyes out, and school's over for the. What are you going to do? What are you going to do in the afternoon? I mean, maybe there's some cricket going on, maybe there's a crew boat, but you're going to pick up a ball and you're going to run around like a madman with other kids, and I think that's existed and it hasn't. And I don't think, I know, we know, historians know that that existed for a millennia, yeah, particularly in
Yeah.
England and to a lesser degree in the United States, where kids, when they weren't in class, got a round ball and they played some type of athletic game that involved moving the ball from one place to another. And then they started, of course, keeping score and we got these rules going, but that didn't happen until 1863, Three Aces Pub in London, where the rules of our game, the rules of soccer, were set down. But for hundreds of years, there was the loosely organized, and they became less loosely codified in the 80s as the English masters started to realize they needed to get control. And one way
Yeah.
to get control of the kids was to organize them in these first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and insert some of the faculty masters into the game to try to get some control over what was near anarchy on occasion in some of these schools. It's a really fascinating story for historians to learn about how football came to be, football soccer.
I think it's amazing. So want to get back to the conversation that I saw on a podcast with you and Dr. Newhoff. You had a conversation at some point about teaching soccer in America, and you had to take a step back and say, wait a second, there's nothing out there that really could help me create this curriculum. I'll pause there. Maybe it's best for you to share how that came to be, and let's jump into your book.
So the story about how the book came to be started from Nuha and Richie, specifically Nuha, Dr. Lee, when she hired me going on 5 years ago. She said, Mark, one of the things I want you to develop, it doesn't have to be this year, but in your tenure here or when you're here, is to develop a history of U.S. soccer class because we're graduating kids. Some of them now are going to the young men. They're on the national team, some of them, and some of them are playing it pro. But I think they need some grounding in the history of U.S. soccer, elite soccer. So I said, great. Yeah. I mean, you're paying me to teach English. Yeah.
This sounds like a dream.
I have a bad reputation as a soccer player. I foul. I get cards. I don't have, although some will argue about that, the way it's
Well,
defined.
the FA outlawed that. So,
Right. Thank you for reading the book, Ray. I don't purposely flip people from behind with my studs up, which was actually a legal, acceptable tactic for decades. No, but my friends, some of them that I played with are still, I can't read, wait to read the chapter on the red card and the yellow card. I get to jump. I'm not a good soccer player. I'm a blue collar. He's defender. Great. So you said, Mark, teach this class. I'm like, great. So I started reading books. Listen, like many of us, I love soccer. I schedule vacations around soccer. We almost get divorced every couple years because of some soccer stuff that I put my feet down on, right? I'm not maybe speaking any different than anybody else around the country. Like, I love soccer. And when you read about it, oh my God, I didn't know this. I didn't know that. But the books, Freddie, if you take a look at, I started reading about 10 books and I mean, I need to teach something. I got Cav Sullivan, Dex Sullivan, roast the ninth graders in my class. I'm trying to slip in these chapters from these books, which are remarkably negative about our own story. Everybody likes to complain about soccer. And you know what? Publishers love to publish writers complaining about soccer. I mean, that's ironically part of our story. So even though some books are well written and they're wonderful, it's remarkably dull, negative, fragmented. Imagine trying to split these chapters into a bunch of ninth and 10th graders when you're reading House on Mango Street and Animal Farm. Oh, here, read this chapter. Their
And by the
heads.
way, these are clever kids who grew up in soccer.
Oh
It's
my
not
God.
so
I mean, I tell this story. I told it to the coaches a month ago. Remember that the YC Academy, we're totally legally different than the soccer side, but we're all in tandem here. So I told this true anecdote about how in ninth grade, 4 years ago when Cal was in ninth grade, and I'm trying to slip in these chapters from these other books to try to help spice up and do what Newha told me to do. Cav comes in and throws his book bag on the table and says, I'm not effing reading this effing, right? Because he's not wrong. This is what's great about the Sullivans.
this is Cap. He's talking about Captain Sullivan. Yeah.
Right. They're right more than 90% of the time. I stick with that. So Cap's right. Like, so I started writing my own stuff. Now, briefly, I had written before. I used to be a person who wrote and loved to write opinion editorials, which are these things that used to appear in newspapers, opposite newspapers editorial
Right.
has opposite the editorial back when we actually had printed newspapers coming out in large volumes. So I was pretty good at that back in my Penn Charter days, writing and sounding off about some event or soccer related or education related or sport related topic. I was pretty good at it. But writing 800 words and 100,000 words are a lot different. So I started attacking this book idea by reading as much as I could about the epoch and then synthesizing that material into something like 10 pages. 800 words is like 3 pages. If I can write 3 pages, I can write 10 pages. And trying to tell the story in chapters that are relatively short and try to cover a certain period of time in what I would hope to be a lively, confident, optimistic style, which really situates this book in a market that's different than the books out there, of which there are not that many. There's only one or two even that try to attempt to cover the whole soccer story. And the greatest one of these would be David Wangerin, so Wangerin. He's probably the godfather for all of us soccer writers and historians. His book, I think, published Soccer in a Football World, maybe 2006, 2007, is really the quote unquote Bible for it. And I follow in his footsteps. But to answer the question, it was reading a lot of stuff, synthesizing the material down. Now, what teach it to the kids? This is before I even had an agent, before I even had a book deal. I'm trying to teach these chapters. And I had immediate responses. You imagine, I'm so lucky. The crucible is that the kids didn't like it. I give them a quiz on it, they fail it, or they don't understand the question. Like they don't understand, I could fix it. And hence this long journey. And it was a long journey, 3-year journey started of me reading a lot, writing a lot, trying to teach it to kids and then tweak it until I got enough chapters to try to get myself to agent. Yeah, it was fun. Professionally, I love two things in my life. I love teaching and I love writing.
Well, you did a great job. It's fascinating. Getting back to the mob football, the pre-football, I think when I was reading that, I found it interesting in terms of up until that FAA meeting, and we'll get to that in a second, how depending on where you were, whether it was England or the British Isles, as you say, or here, the rules were interpreted incredibly differently. Mob football was dangerous. People died. It was a rock that you ran to, not a goal. It was like a place on one side. There could be 10 people playing. There could be 100 people playing. So why don't we talk a little bit about that and then how that sort of, I don't want to go back to 1100, whatever, where, obviously we're all saying that England is the founder. Am I correct? Is that because I saw Cuju came around at the same time from
Yeah.
China.
Let's dispel a few myths and make sure that our listeners are clear on this. Let's just clarify that there's no doubt, and we should celebrate the fact that the English codified, and I'll briefly tell the story.
Yeah,
50s in England, you had a bunch of what we call public schools. I want to be clear on the word public. They weren't public. Anybody could apply, but only the rich could actually enter. And these schools, and let's just talk about it, starts to gain steam around 1840, 1850. These public schools, which are essentially private schools, rich white kids were playing some codified game within their schoolhouse, so to speak. And the rules were usually handed down from class to class. The seniors decided how the game was played and they were rarely written down. But then the headmasters, if you will, the masters started inserting themselves into the game and they started having loosely identified codes, some of which were written, but many don't exist today about, okay, how the game was played. When will it start? Where do you have to move the ball? How do you score? Is it kicking, running? So you had different things going on at different schools. Imagine, just take the 10 top independent schools in Philly, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, 1850, to the degree there were any. Just imagine that there were some, and they're just playing a different kind of mob football game. And let's not even call it mob now. Let's call it pre-soccer. Some were playing more of the running with the ball game. You're running towards something, you get tackled, you get up, the guy has to back up, you run, you can kick it. Or like Australian rules football. It was different.
It depended on the school you were at. Rugby, as you said, which was an actual school, which I didn't know, and you had Cambridge or whatever it might be. So depending, the rules were different at each place.
The school that you went to determined the type of pre-football, pre-soccer. For listeners, when I use the word football, soccer, I'm not talking about gridiron football at all. Football, soccer to me means soccer. And a helpful term for listeners and historians is just use soccer. When you use soccer, nobody can disagree with what you're talking about. You're talking about the laws of the game that were set down by the English at that Freemasons Club in 1863. That's soccer and football, the way I'm talking about it.
So the word soccer comes from association. So C in the middle, which that was fascinating to me. And the way that they said things on the end. Maybe explain that real quick. I don't need to break you
Yes,
off by.
sure. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
In 1863, when the laws of the game were written down, codified by a group of men, ended elite gentlemen from the elite schools that had then graduated to go into local cricket clubs or local clubs met at this pub. And in there were young men who were playing and wanted the handling game. They wanted to run around. It was pre-rugby. That's what a couple people in these meetings that went on for like 6 to 8 weeks. They met every week, probably drank some beer, trying to codify. And remember, London, the newspapers were publishing this stuff. Hey, we ought to get together some rules so that the different high schools, public schools can play each other. So you don't have to argue about rules, right? I mean, it makes sense that you step back, you have to decide. Well, how are you going to decide? Well, get together the representatives from these school clubs and hammer it out over a month. Well, that's what happened. And in that group, you had the pre-rugby contingent. I mean, I'm simplifying a little bit, a lot perhaps, but you had the pre-rugby contingent that wanted to run around and kick people in the shins, and it was more brutal, and it was pre-rugby. And then you had the soccer people, if you will, or the pre-soccer people that wanted a more, not tamer game, but they wanted to establish rules and get rid of the hacking. And they wanted to create rules that, listen, kicking the ball was the only way to score. And you couldn't run the ball over the line. So if you get rid of the fact that you can't catch the ball and run with it, okay, and you get rid of the hacking component, you create the ability to allow for the beautiful game to come. And those rules called officially the laws of the game, there were 13 of them. They're handwritten, they're published. You can view them, you can buy them on Amazon. It's really fascinating to see the rules. There are 3 of them right near the end that you can see form the basis of the beautiful game. 1863 London. Yes, we thank the English. You guys created the game. It's not as if nobody around the world wasn't doing anything like it. That's another debate. If you want to get into the American soccer historian debate, they're driving me crazy. But the point is that the English codified it. Now, to your point, though, you wanted me to talk about the name. In 1863, this group of people that met at Freemasons started calling themselves the Football Association. Football Association. When the rules were adopted, I think I could get the date wrong, December 2nd or 3rd, something like that, 1863. The name of it was Football Association or football. They also, within a couple years, started calling that activity that they had just codified soccer. Soccer, to the point for the people that understand this word, it was created by the British as a shortened version of ASOC, which is associated with the word ER, which is the suffix fad of the time. That was like 1870s, I think, where if you're from London, you're all the Londoners. If you're from Oxford, you're the Oxforders. If you're from Cambridge, you're Cambridgers. So they kind of created this word, soccer. It was their word, right? And now this is funny. You know what this is going, because the Brits, the Limeys, are always complaining about us Yanks. And when the NASL got started in the late 60s and had its glorious run through the continent, petered out and then died horrible death in 1984. But for the 70s, when we're start We have Brady over here, Beckenbauer. Oh my God, we have George Best. Yeah, they're past their prime, but listen, they're still superstars. It started scaring the Brits, the Lineys, English, at which point they dropped North American Soccer League. Oh my gosh. Now that the Yanks have soccer in their title, in their league, they drop it completely from their lexicon and have been mischaracterizing it as an Americanism ever since, which is, of course, ridiculous. Call it soccer, call it football, use it interchangeably. Stop. You can't even, we're going to the World Cup. You're going to have 100 podcasters and people and announcers complaining about soccer. Well, let's just let it go. Call it soccer. In my building, kids call it football. They call it soccer. Everybody knows we're not talking about gridiron. Right? Nobody, I'm exactly. Nobody in my building cares about gridiron. That's fine. I like NFL, but it's done. Let's stop talking about it. We are American soccer football players with the rest of the world, and that's not about soccer.
I think it's fascinating. I kind of knew this, and then as I'm reading through it, I'm like, unbelievable, truly unbelievable. You made this word up, and now you're dismissing it. So the FA rules was huge because now it created rules for this game. And I found this interesting, going back to my wife comment, because I was like, "Hun, do you ever think about the British Empire and the fact for a long time they were the biggest empire in the world, which meant their ships were arriving at ports in every country you could possibly think of, and then had this rule book of this game that the locals were like, huh, what is this? And then they would play. They would get on trains, they would head inside. To your point in your book, you said it very specifically. It's such common sense. I just never thought of it that way. How the game expanded, probably relatively quickly given the time.
Right, Freddie. I mean, you explain it well. I mean, bravo. That's exactly what happened. I mean, we're really compressing a 30-year time period.
I know
1860,
we're
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's fun. I mean, 1863, December, the rule books were published by Lillywhite. There's just some company that did cricket books in London. They have the rule books. They got balls. And they start putting them on ships. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to retrace your steps when you're retracing mine that I'm retracing David Wangren's because we're all connected, right? So you can imagine the diaspora of soccer rule books going out into the world because yes, the English were ruling 1/4 of the world at the time. You can picture in Montevideo, Rio, the port near Rio de Janeiro, the balls and the British who were building the railroads inward. They had the merchants and were helping establish commerce. Throwing out a bag of balls in a rule book, and who are these crazy English with this leather ball and these rules are. And is it a real soccer game? Totally the way it was? Well, sort of, but there's lots of variations. You can see the native of those countries all over the world coming to experience this thing and then not gradually. Well, we don't know. Each country has its own journey of taking the laws of the game, intertwining it with their own people and making it their own type of game, which is a great quote from this European writer, Edward Galliano, who says, tell me where you're from and I'll tell you how you play. I don't know what it is in Spanish, but that's the English translation. And it does explain then why you have South American teams that for many years have British names of their clubs and their associations, their football association, many years had British lexiconography in it until it reverted to their own local version. But yeah, the Brits, and to be honest, for us Americans, the Scots, to get distinctions so I don't irritate the historians, gave soccer, particularly to the North Americans. And that's a whole other story because ours was a little bit different. I just want to pin this because it is an interesting historical debate. I don't believe that you can say that there were colleges and high schools in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, let's just take that area of the world, that were playing mob football. Perhaps they were, but I haven't come across it to the degree that what was going on, say, in London and in Boston, Philadelphia, New Jersey. And this gets to a technical point, but I still think it's important. It's
The
not as
four
if the United
quarters.
States was
Yeah.
a blank slate when it came to pre-soccer where it was perhaps in Africa and certain places of Asia and maybe even South America till the Brits got there. Our story is a little bit more nuanced. And that gets into a historical debate that I don't know whether the readers, your viewers, listeners would be interested in. For example, we didn't just wait until the Brits in the garment district to arrive and start playing football. Some historians believe that's the way it happened. I don't. I think it was much more complicated than you.